My husband handed me the divorce papers across our own kitchen table on the morning of my 64th birthday. And the first thing he said was that the house was his, and I should start packing. Marcus Whitfield smiled when he said it. The same smile he had used on clients for 31 years, and he had no idea that every dollar he thought he was taking ran through accounts that carried only one name. And it was not his. I want you to sit with that picture for a moment, because I have carried it for a long time. A man in a pressed gray suit, freshly shaved, smelling of the cologne I bought him every Christmas, sliding a manila folder toward the woman who had typed his first business plan, balanced his first set of books, and signed her name beside his on the very first loan. He thought he was ending things. What Marcus did not know, what he could not have known because he never once bothered to read the documents he asked me to organize, was that within 72 hours, a bank officer in a glass office downtown was going to freeze every account he intended to drain. And that all of those accounts, the savings, the holding company, the investment line, the trust that held what was left of the Hamilton inheritance my grandmother had fought to keep, all of it was titled to me. Eleanor Grace Whitfield. Before this story is over, I am going to tell you how a man who spent 3 decades calling me his secretary discovered, in front of the people he most wanted to impress, exactly whose name was on the pen. Before I tell you what happened next, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever been written off by someone you loved, treated as furniture in your own home, only to discover that you were holding more than they ever guessed? Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and what time it is in your part of the world. Then settle in, because this is a long story, and I am going to tell you all of it. My name is Eleanor Grace Whitfield, though for the first 64 years of my life, almost no one used the middle name. My mother gave it to me. She said grace was the thing you held on to when the world gave you nothing else, and she was a woman who knew about being given nothing. She raised me in a narrow house on Delaney Street with a leak over the kitchen and a Bible on the table that was older than the house itself, and she taught me 2 things before I was 10 years old. The first was that I should never let a man do my counting for me. The second was that the people who underestimate you are handing you a gift, and a wise woman takes it quietly and says thank you. I did not understand either lesson until I was much older. I understand them now. That morning, the morning of the papers, I had woken before Marcus, the way I had woken before Marcus for 31 years. The house on Briarcliff Lane was quiet in that particular way old houses get quiet before the heat comes on, and I went down to the kitchen in my robe and started the coffee and stood at the window over the sink looking out at the garden I had planted myself. The hydrangeas my friend Coretta and I had put in the ground the summer our husbands were both too busy to notice we existed. It was October. The leaves on the maple at the end of the drive had gone the color of a bruise healing, that deep gold edged in red, and I remember thinking, with no idea of what the day held, that I had been blessed to live somewhere I could watch a tree do that every autumn for 26 years. I was 64 years old that day. I want you to hold the number, because the people in this story kept forgetting it, kept treating me as if I were 90 and fragile, or as if I were nobody at all, and the number matters. 31 years married to Marcus. 41 years since I left my mother's narrow house on Delaney Street with a typing certificate and a grudge against poverty. 26 years in the house on Briarcliff Lane. 18 years running the books of Whitfield and Associates from a spare bedroom that Marcus liked to call my little office when he was being generous and my hobby room when he was not. Numbers. I have always been good with numbers. That is the part of the story everyone forgot, and it is the part that mattered most. I heard him on the stairs before I saw him. Marcus came down dressed, which was unusual for a Saturday, in the charcoal suit and the blue tie I had picked out for him at the tailor's the spring before, and he had that briskness about him, that I had learned, over 3 decades, to read like a barometer reads weather. Something was coming. He poured himself coffee from the pot I had made, did not pour me any, and sat down at the head of the table with a folder I did not recognize. "Eleanor," he said, "we need to talk, and I want to keep this civilized." When a man tells you he wants to keep something civilized, what he means is that he has already decided to do something that is not civil at all, and he would prefer you not make a scene about it. I had heard him use the word with vendors he was about to stop paying. I sat down across from him with my own coffee, and I folded my hands, and I waited, because waiting is a skill, and I had spent a lifetime learning it. He slid the folder across the table. The manila was crisp, the kind from the good box, and I noticed, because I noticed these things, that the tab was labeled in his handwriting and not mine, which meant he had prepared this himself, in secret, without the woman who had labeled every folder in his professional life. That stung more than I expected. Such a small thing. He had typed and tabbed and filed it himself, rather than let me see it coming. "I've filed for divorce," he said. "It's done. My attorney sent the petition Thursday. You'll be served officially, but I wanted you to hear it from me first, because that's the decent thing." The kitchen was very quiet. The coffee maker ticked as it cooled. Outside, somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and stopped. I looked at the folder, and then I looked at my husband of 31 years, the boy I had met at a church social in 1992 when he was selling insurance door to door and could not afford the suit he wore to do it, and I asked him the only question that mattered. "Why now?" He had an answer ready. Men like Marcus always have the answer ready before you ask the question. He talked about growing apart, about how we had become roommates, about how he was 66 and he was not dead yet and he deserved to be happy. And I let him talk. Because while he talked, I was watching his hands, and his hands told me everything his mouth was working so hard to hide. His left hand kept drifting to a second document under the first one, a page he did not want me to read yet. "And the house," I said, when he finally ran out of rehearsed sentences. "The house," he said. And here the smile came, the client's smile, the one that meant he believed he was about to win. "Eleanor, let's be reasonable. The house is in my name. It always has been. I bought it. I paid the mortgage. My income carried this family. I'm not trying to put you on the street. I'm a Christian man. But the equity in this house is mine, and the smart thing, the clean thing, is for you to find a smaller place and let me sell. I'll be more than fair on the settlement. You'll be comfortable. You will be comfortable." He said it the way you would promise a dog a treat. And I want to be honest with you, because this is my testimony, and I am not going to pretty it up. In that moment, a part of me, the part that was still the girl from Delaney Street who had been hungry and cold and afraid of being poor, that part of me wanted to weep. 31 years. I had given this man 31 years and 3 decades of quiet labor, and he was offering me comfortable like a coupon. But I did not weep. My mother's voice came up in me, clear as the morning. "Never let a man do your counting for you." And underneath that, quieter, the second lesson, the one I had spent a lifetime not quite believing until that exact morning. The people who underestimate you are handing you a gift. Because here is what Marcus Whitfield did not know. Sitting at the head of the table he believed was his. In the house he believed was his. Telling me about the equity he believed was his. The house on Briarcliff Lane had been refinanced 11 years earlier, after the company nearly went under in the recession. And the only way the bank had agreed to the refinance, the only way, was if the new note was secured against the assets of the Hamilton Family Trust. My trust. My grandmother's money. My name. Marcus had signed those papers in a stack of 40 other papers on a Tuesday afternoon when he was late for a golf game, and he had told me to handle the rest, and I had handled the rest. I had handled all of it for 18 years, and not one time in 18 years had he asked to see whose name was where. I closed the folder without reading it. I slid it back across the table to him, and I stood up, and I rinsed my coffee cup in the sink. And I said, in the calm voice my mother used when she had decided something, "All right, Marcus, we'll do this properly then with lawyers and documents. I'd want it that way too." He looked surprised. He had braced for tears, maybe for shouting, certainly for begging. He had not braced for calm. Calm, I have learned, frightens a certain kind of man more than any amount of weeping, because a weeping woman is a woman he understands. A calm one is a woman who knows something he does not. "I'm glad you're being mature about this," he said, and he could not quite keep the unease out of his voice. "I learned it from watching you," I said, and I went upstairs to get dressed, and that was the morning my reckoning began. Now, if you have ever watched someone good get written off, treated as furniture in their own home, quietly dismissed by the very people who owed them the most, and some part of you wanted to see that person proven right, not with cruelty, but with the plain, unanswerable truth, then you already belong here. Take a moment and subscribe, because the people who do are exactly who this channel is for. We tell stories about the dismissed proving they held the power all along, and we tell them all the way to the end. Now let me take you back, because to understand how the bank came to freeze every account in my husband's reach, I have to tell you how those accounts came to carry my name in the first place. And to do that, I have to tell you about my grandmother. My grandmother was named Ada Hamilton, and she was born in Mississippi in 1909, in a county where a black woman who owned anything was a woman with a target on her back. She did not let that stop her. By the time she died, she owned 3 rental houses, a corner store, and the long, quiet patience it takes to hold property in a place that did not want you to hold it. She had buried 2 husbands and outlived a fire that took the store twice. And the second time it burned, she rebuilt it herself with insurance money she had to fight a white adjuster for 11 months to collect. She taught me to read a contract before I could ride a bicycle. She would sit me on her knee with the deed to the corner store and run my small finger under the line where her name was written and say, "Eleanor Grace. This word right here, Hamilton, that is the only word in this whole paper that loves you. You learn to put your own name on things. You hear me? You learn where your name goes." I spent more of my childhood in Ada Hamilton's kitchen than I did in my own. My mother worked 2 jobs, and so the corner store became my afternoons and my evenings and most of my summers. And my grandmother put me to work the moment I was tall enough to see over the counter. But it was not the work that shaped me. It was the watching. I watched a black woman in the middle of a century that gave her nothing run a business with her spine straight and her ledger perfect, and I watched the men who came to skin her go away, skinned themselves. Every time. Smiling, not even sure how it had happened. There was a salesman who came once a month to sell her stock, and he had a habit of writing the invoice in pencil, and then, after she paid, going back and changing a 4 to a 9, a 1 to a 7, small marks, the kind a busy woman would never catch. My grandmother caught every one. She never accused him. She would simply take the invoice, lay it flat on the counter, take her own pencil, and correct his numbers in front of him, slowly, saying the figures out loud as she went. And then she would pay him the true amount and thank him kindly and tell him she looked forward to next month. She did this for years. And I asked her once, when I was maybe 8, why she did not just tell him to stop cheating or find a different salesman. And she set down her pencil and she looked at me and she said, "Eleanor Grace, a man like that is going to cheat somebody every day of his life. I can't fix him. But I can let him know that this one woman in this one store sees every mark he makes. And a man who knows he is seen behaves himself. You don't have to punish people, child. You just have to be the one they can't fool. Being unfoolable is its own kind of power, and it's quieter than the other kind, and it lasts longer." I did not understand it then. I think I understand it now better than I understand almost anything. She taught me to read a contract before I could ride a bicycle. She would sit me on her knee with the deed to the corner store and run my small finger under the line where her name was written and say, "Eleanor Grace. This word right here, Hamilton. That is the only word in this whole paper that loves you. The bank doesn't love you. The county clerk doesn't love you. The man who sold it to me, God rest him, surely didn't love me. But this word, your name, that's the one thing on the paper that's on your side. You learn to put your own name on things. You hear me? You learn where your name goes, and you learn to read every line above it before you let your hand make that mark. Because the people who want to take from you are counting on you not to read. So you read. You always read." She told me, more than once, about the fire. There were 2 fires in the life of that corner store, years apart, and the second one was the one that made her legend in our family. The store burned in the night. Electrical, they said, though my grandmother had her own opinions about who held the match. And she filed her insurance claim like any honest woman. And the white adjuster the company sent looked at her and saw exactly what such a man was trained to see, which was a black woman he could pay pennies on the dollar and feel righteous about it. He offered her a fraction of what the policy owed. He told her it was final. He told her, and I will never forget that she told me he said this with a smile, that she should take it and be grateful, because some folks in her position would get nothing at all. My grandmother did not take it. She did not raise her voice. She went home that night and she got out the policy, the actual policy, every page, and she read it again, all of it, the way she had taught me to read. And she found the clauses the adjuster was counting on her not to find, and she wrote letters, and she made copies, and she kept records of every conversation, the date and the time and what was said, in a composition book she kept under the counter. It took her 11 months. 11 months of a man telling her no, of a company telling her the matter was closed, of being made to feel that a woman like her had no business insisting. And at the end of 11 months, the insurance company paid her. In full. Every dollar the policy owed, because she had made it cheaper to pay her than to keep fighting a woman who had read every line and written down every word. And she rebuilt the store with their money, and she never once raised her voice, and the adjuster, I am told, was reassigned to a different territory. They thought I was a woman they could close the book on, she told me, and I let them think it for 11 months. Because a woman they've closed the book on is a woman they stop watching. You remember that, Eleanor Grace. The most dangerous thing you can be is somebody people have decided not to look at. Because while they're not looking, you can do anything. When she died, I was 29 and newly married to Marcus, and she left almost everything to me. Not to my brother, who was charming and useless and is now living in Florida on a boat he cannot afford. Not to Marcus, whom she had met exactly twice and described both times as a man who talks more than he listens. To me, she set it up in a trust, the Hamilton Family Trust, with me as the sole beneficiary and, in time, the sole trustee, and the lawyer who drew it up, a careful old man named Mr. Abernathy, told me something I did not understand at 29, but came to understand completely. Your grandmother, he said, did not want a man to ever be able to take this from you with a signature, so it will never be marital property unless you make it so. Keep it separate. Keep it in your name. Never commingle it. Do you understand, Mrs. Whitfield? I said I did, and I did not, and then I went home and Marcus asked me how much the old woman had left, and I told him the truth, which was several $100,000 and 3 properties, and I watched his eyes change. I was 29 and in love, and I did not yet know to be afraid of the way a man's eyes change when he hears a number. But some part of me, the part my grandmother had built, kept the trust separate anyway. For 35 years, I kept it separate. I never told Marcus the exact figure as it grew. I never put a joint name on it. When he wanted to use it as collateral, I structured it so the trust was protected, and the personal accounts took the risk. He thought I was being timid. He thought it was my little anxiety about money, my Delaney Street nervousness, and he let me have it the way you let a child keep a security blanket, because indulging me cost him nothing, and he had no idea it was costing him everything. So when I say the accounts carried my name, understand that this was not luck. This was 35 years of a woman quietly putting her own name on things, exactly the way Ada Hamilton had taught her, in a marriage to a man who never once thought to check. Let me tell you about the marriage, because I do not want you to think Marcus was a monster. He was not a monster. Rule 3 of the kind of story I tell is that the man is never a cartoon. Marcus Whitfield was charming and hard-working, and, in his own way, for a long time, he loved me. He just loved me the way a man loves a comfortable chair. He loved me for what I did for him and the trouble I saved him, and he never once stopped to wonder whether the chair had a mind of its own. We met, as I said, at a church social in the spring of 1992. He was selling insurance, and I was working as a bookkeeper for a furniture company and going to night classes for my accounting certificate. He was the most confident man in the room, and I was the quietest woman, and he crossed the whole fellowship hall to bring me a glass of punch, and he said, "You've been watching everybody all night and saying nothing. I bet you're the smartest person here." And reader, that was the truest thing Marcus Whitfield ever said to me, and it took him 31 years to forget he had ever said it. We married in 1993, in the same church where we had met, and I wore my grandmother's pearls, and my mother cried in the front pew, and Marcus stood at the altar in a suit that fit him. Finally, because by then I had taught him that a man who wants to be trusted with money has to look like a man who already has some, and I had bought the suit on layaway over 4 months without telling him how. He thought he had bought it himself with a good month of commissions. I let him think it. That was the first of 10,000 small things I let him think, and I want you to notice the pattern early, because the pattern is the whole story. I built the man and let him believe he had built himself, because believing it made him better at his work, and his work fed us both. I did not resent it then. A young wife in love does not keep a ledger of credit. The ledger came later, and even then I kept it only in the back of a drawer in my mind, not to use against him, but because keeping ledgers is simply what I am. He wanted to start his own agency within the first year. He was good at selling and bad at being sold to, which is to say he was a wonderful salesman and a terrible employee, and he chafed under every manager he ever had. The banks would not lend to a black insurance salesman with no collateral and a young marriage, no matter how good his numbers were. And Marcus came home from the 3rd rejection and sat on the edge of our bed with his tie undone and his shoulders down, and he said, In a small voice I rarely heard from him. Maybe I'm not the man I thought I was, Ellie. And I sat down beside him, and I took his hand, and I made the decision that built our entire life, and I made it the way my grandmother taught me, with my name protected and my eyes open. I took $11,000 of my grandmother's money. Carefully, only $11,000, when I could have taken far more. Because Mr. Abernathy's voice was in my ear telling me to keep the trust separate, never commingle, and so I structured it the right way, the safe way, the way that would still be standing 31 years later when a man slid a folder across a kitchen table. The trust loaned $11,000 to me, Eleanor, personally, with a promissory note and an interest rate and a repayment schedule. All of it papered and signed and real. And then I, personally, with my own separate funds now, made an investment in my husband's new business. Every dollar traceable. Every dollar in my name until the moment it became the business's capital. I did not hand my grandmother's trust to my husband. I never once did that, in 31 years. I handed him the fruit of it, structured so that the tree could never be cut down. And I handed it to him, and I said, "Build something." And he looked at the cashier's check in my hand, $11,000, more money than either of us had ever held at one time, and his eyes filled, and he said, "Where did you? How did you?" And I said, "Don't worry about how. Worry about making it worth my grandmother's name." And he did. For a long time, he did. He had the charm and the hustle and the face people trusted. And I had the rest. And the rest is most of a business, though most men never learn that. I kept the books from the first day. I tracked every policy and every premium and every commission. I learned the insurance business cold. Not because anyone taught me, but because I read, the way my grandmother taught me to read. Every regulation and every contract and every renewal clause, until I understood the machinery better than the men who sold its products. I caught the math error in year 2 that would have had us underwriting policies at a loss, without ever knowing it, an error that would have quietly bled us to death over 18 months. I caught the office manager in year 6, a pleasant man named Doug whom Marcus adored, who was skimming from the premium trust account in amounts small enough that Marcus would never have noticed in 100 years, and I noticed in a single afternoon of reconciliation. And I documented all of it, and I handed Marcus a folder, and Marcus stared at it and said, "How did you even? Doug would never." And I said, "Doug has been stealing from us for 14 months, and here is every dollar, and here is the date of every withdrawal, and you should call our attorney before you call the police." And we recovered most of it, because I had the records, and Marcus told the story for years afterward of how he had caught his thieving office manager, and I let him tell it, because the version where I caught it made me visible, and being visible felt, in those days, like vanity, and my grandmother had no patience for vanity. When the company grew big enough to need a real name, Marcus called it Whitfield and Associates, and I asked him, half joking, "Which Whitfield?" And he laughed and said, "There's only one Whitfield that matters, baby," and kissed my forehead. And went to lunch with a client, and I sat in the spare bedroom and finished the quarterly taxes. I have thought about that sentence 10,000 times since. There's only one Whitfield that matters. He meant it as a love word in 1998. He meant, "You and me are one, baby." The name covers us both. But a man's careless words have a way of curdling into his true beliefs over enough years, and by the end, when he handed me that folder, he meant it the other way entirely. There's only one Whitfield that matters, and it is not you. The same 5 words, 30 years apart. And the cruelest part The part I did not understand until the very end was that he was right both times, and the Whitfield that mattered was me. For 31 years I was the associate that "the" and stood for. I was never on the masthead. My name was never on the door. I did not mind then. I told myself it did not matter whose name was on the door, as long as our name was on the bank account. And our name was, both of ours, on the operating accounts, the ones that ran the daily business. But the holding company that owned the building, and the investment line that held the profit, and the trust beneath it all, those carried only mine, structured exactly the way my grandmother's lawyer had taught me, and Marcus signed where I told him to sign and never asked why. I am going to be honest about the years in between, because if I only tell you the wound and the reckoning, I will have lied to you by leaving out the long middle where I let it happen. There were years I was happy. Real years, whole years, and I will not let the ending steal them from me, because they were mine and they were good. There were summer evenings on the back porch of the house on Briarcliff Lane when Marcus and I sat in the 2 wicker chairs and watched that maple at the end of the drive turn gold, and he would reach over and take my hand without saying anything, and we would sit like that until the streetlights came on. 2 people who had built something together out of nothing, and in those moments he saw me, and I knew he saw me, and I was happy in a way I do not regret being. I want the women watching who are still in long marriages to know that I am not telling you a story about a man who was a villain from the first day. I am telling you a story about how a good marriage can rot slowly, from the top down, like a tree that looks fine until the wind takes it, and how the rot is almost always made of the same thing, which is one person deciding they no longer have to see the other one. We could not have children. I will not lay that grief out in full, because it is the one part of this story that is only mine and not for anyone's instruction, except to say that we tried for many years, and it did not come, and there was a season in our late 30s when that grief nearly broke us. When I would find Marcus in the dark in the spare bedroom that would never be a nursery, just sitting, and I would sit with him, and we did not have words for it. And we held each other and grieved a child who never had a name. That grief, I think, is the hinge of everything, because it changed Marcus. A different man might have turned toward his wife in that loss, and for a few years he did, and then slowly he turned away from it instead, into the only thing that ever gave him back exactly what he put in, which was the business. He poured himself into Whitfield and Associates the way a man pours himself into a child, and the company grew the way a child grows. And somewhere in there, the company became the son we never had. And he raised it the way some fathers raise sons, by taking it to the country club to show it off, by bragging about it to other men, by needing it to make him look like a success. And I raised it the other way. The mother's way. The way you raise a child nobody thanks you for, by feeding it at 3 a.m. and cleaning up its messes and catching it before it fell. In a spare bedroom, alone, while its father took the credit at dinner. I do not say that to be bitter. I say it because it is true, and because the truth is the only thing that holds up the reckoning when it comes. A reckoning built on a lie collapses. Mine was built on 31 years of documented fact. Somewhere in the last 10 years, Marcus changed in a way I noticed, but did not name. The company had made him wealthy, finally, properly wealthy, the kind of wealthy he had been hungry for since he was a boy too poor to buy his own suit, and wealth did to him what it does to a certain kind of man. It made him believe he had done it alone. The bigger the bank balance, the smaller my part in it became in his mind, until in the version of his life he told at dinner parties. He was a self-made man who had built an empire from nothing while his wife kept house. I sat at those dinners and smiled and refilled the wine and let him tell it. Because correcting a man in front of his friends is a satisfaction that costs more than it pays, and my grandmother had taught me to count costs. But I was counting. Lord, I was always counting. And about 18 months before the morning of the papers, I started to count something new. Because Marcus had started to behave like a man with a second set of books, and I, of all people, know what that looks like. Her name was Vanessa. I will tell you about her later, because she matters less than Marcus thought, and more than he wanted. But I knew about her almost from the start, the way a wife who keeps the books always knows, because money does not lie even when men do. There were charges. A hotel 2 hours away on a weekend, he said he was at a conference in a different city. A jewelry store, and no jewelry ever came to me. A monthly transfer to an account I did not recognize, small enough that he thought it would hide in the noise of a business that moved millions, and it would have hidden from anyone but the woman who had reconciled every account in that business for 18 years. I want to tell you exactly how I found it, because the finding is the kind of thing that matters to women like me, women who keep the books, and I think there is a woman watching tonight who needs to hear that the careful work is never wasted. It was a Tuesday in spring, 18 months before the morning of the papers. I was doing the monthly reconciliation, which I did every month, late at night, after Marcus was asleep, in the spare bedroom he called my hobby room, with a cup of tea going cold beside me and the lamp throwing its small circle of light on the page. I was not looking for anything. I want you to understand that. I was not a suspicious wife snooping through her husband's accounts. I was simply doing what I had done every month for 18 years, the boring holy work of making sure every dollar agreed with every other dollar. And there it was, the way these things always are, not hidden well, just hidden lazily, by a man who believed no one was looking. A recurring transfer, the 14th of every month, an amount that was carefully chosen to be forgettable, large enough to matter to a person and small enough to vanish in a business our size, going to an account at a bank we did not use, an account in a name I did not recognize. And I sat there in my circle of lamplight, and I felt the floor of my whole life tilt very slowly, the way a ship tilts before you have admitted to yourself that it is sinking. And I did the thing I always do, the only thing I know how to do when the ground moves. I pulled the records. All of them. I went back 2 years, 3 years, and I built a ledger of my own marriage's betrayal, line by line, the hotel and the jewelry, and the 14th of every month. And when I was done, it was nearly 4 a.m, and I had a complete, dated, documented picture of a man who had been living a second life on money he thought I was too simple to track. I did not cry. People expect that I cried, and I want to be honest, so I will tell you that I did not. Not that night. And the not crying frightened me more than the discovery did. I sat in that little room with the proof of my husband's affair, laid out in my own careful handwriting, and I felt myself become very calm and very cold and very clear, the way my grandmother must have felt the night the store burned, and I understood, in that calm, that some part of me had been preparing for this Tuesday for 31 years without ever admitting it. The way you keep a fire extinguisher in a house you do not expect to burn. I did not confront him. I want to be clear about that. Because the world tells women that the strong thing, the self-respecting thing, is the confrontation, the thrown ring, the suitcase by the door. And maybe for some women it is. But I am Ada Hamilton's granddaughter. And my grandmother did not confront the adjuster, and she did not confront the salesman who changed his 4s to 9s. She let them keep cheating, in the open, while she wrote everything down. Because a man who knows he is caught changes his behavior, and a man who thinks he is winning keeps handing you evidence. I had a husband who thought he was winning. The worst thing I could do was tell him otherwise. So I closed my ledger, and I washed my teacup, and I went and lay down beside my sleeping husband in the dark, and I listened to him breathe, the man I had married in my grandmother's pearls. And I did not wake him, and I did not weep, and in the morning I made his coffee and kissed his cheek and sent him off to a business I owned more of than he would ever understand. And I did something instead that he never imagined his timid wife was capable of. I started to prepare. Now I have heard people say, when I have told pieces of this story, that I should have left him the day I found the charges. That a self-respecting woman walks out. And maybe they are right. And maybe I am not the heroine they want me to be. But understand who I am and where I come from. I am Ada Hamilton's granddaughter. My grandmother did not walk out of the burning store. She waited 11 months and made the adjuster pay her every dollar he owed, and she rebuilt with his money, and she never once raised her voice. I am made of that. I do not walk out. I get my papers in order. And then I let the truth walk in. So for 18 months, while my husband planned his exit, I quietly made sure that the door he intended to walk out of opened onto a wall. Here is what I did, and I am going to be specific, because the specifics are the whole point, and because somewhere out there is a woman watching this who needs to know that the boring, careful paperwork is the strongest weapon a dismissed woman owns. It is not the dramatic gesture. It is the deed. It is the title. It is whose name is on the account. First, I met with Mr. Abernathy. He was old by then, well into his 80s, mostly retired, working from a small office in his home with a view of his garden, but his mind was a steel trap, and he remembered my grandmother, and he remembered me. I drove out to see him on a gray morning and told Marcus I was going to a quilting circle, which was the kind of thing Marcus believed I did with my time, and I sat in the old man's study surrounded by the smell of pipe tobacco and old paper, and I laid out what I had found, the ledger of charges, the second account, all of it in my own neat hand, the way I would present anything. Mr. Abernathy did not interrupt me. He let me lay all of it out, every page, and when I was finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes for a long moment, and then he put them back on, and he looked at me. And there was something in his face that I can only call satisfaction. The satisfaction of an old craftsman, seeing that the thing he built 40 years ago is still holding weight. "Eleanor," he said, "do you remember what I told you the day we set up the trust? You were 29 years old, and you did not understand a word of it. I could see it on your face. But you nodded anyway, and you did exactly as I said for 35 years. Keep it separate. Never commingle. Keep your name on it. Do you remember?" "I remember," I said. "Your grandmother," he said, "was the most formidable client I ever had in 50 years of practice, and I have told you that before. But I am going to tell you the part I never told you. The day she came to me to set up that trust, she said something I have never forgotten. She said, 'Misty Abernathy, I am not doing this to keep my money from the government or from my no-account son, or from the taxman. I am doing this because someday my granddaughter is going to marry a man, because girls do, and I want to be sure that on the worst day of her marriage, when that man reaches for everything she has, his hand closes on air.' She said it just like that. His hand closes on air. And I built it that way. And you, Eleanor Grace, you kept it that way for 35 years. Through every temptation to make it easy, every refinance and every loan, and every time it would have been simpler to just put both your names on something. You never did. And And so today I get to tell you what your grandmother paid me to be able to tell you someday." He leaned forward, and he said it very gently. His hand closes on air. He cannot touch the trust. He never could. Now, let us make absolutely certain he cannot touch anything else. I will not lie to you. I wept then. Not at the betrayal, which I had wept out somewhere in the 18 months of nights. I wept because a woman who had been dead for 35 years had reached forward across all that time and put her arms around me on the worst morning of my life, had known this morning was coming before I was old enough to fear it, had loved me enough to build me a wall out of paper and patience before I ever needed one. That is what an inheritance is. Not money. It is the love of the dead, made into something that holds. Miss Abernathy was too frail by then to take on a full divorce matter. But he had a younger attorney he had trained and trusted completely, a woman named Patricia Okafor. And he picked up his telephone, the old kind with a cord. And he called her himself, right there in front of me. And he said, "Patricia, I am sending you the granddaughter of the finest client I ever had. And I want you to treat this the way I would treat it, which is to say I want you to be absolutely certain, and absolutely patient, and absolutely quiet, until the day it is time not to be. And over the next year, carefully, legally, in full daylight with everything documented, Patricia Okafor helped me make certain that everything I had built and protected stayed exactly where Ada Hamilton had taught me to put it. In my name, where it had always been. Second, I did not move a single dollar in a way that could be called hiding. This is important, and I want you to hear it, because the temptation when you are betrayed is to grab and hide, and grabbing and hiding is how good women end up in the wrong in front of a judge. I did not hide anything. I did not have to. Everything that was mine was already mine, plainly in the records, going back decades. The accounts Marcus believed were ours, the savings and the investment line and the holding company, were mine of record, and always had been, and the joint operating accounts were the only thing we truly shared, and those held the least. My whole defense was simply the truth. Kept tidy. The strongest thing I did in 18 months was nothing dramatic at all. I made sure every document was current, every title was clean, and every dollar could be traced to its lawful place with a name beside it. My name. Third, and this is the part Marcus never saw coming, because it required understanding a thing about banks that a salesman never bothers to learn. When you file for divorce and there are large, jointly referenced assets, and when one spouse has been moving money in ways that look like an attempt to dissipate marital property, a bank, especially a bank with a careful compliance department, will freeze accounts pending clarity. They do it to protect themselves. And Marcus, my Marcus, in his rush to set up his new life with Vanessa before the ink was dry, had spent the previous 3 months doing exactly the thing that triggers that freeze. He had been quietly trying to move money out of the operating accounts into a new account. His account. The one he thought I did not know about, getting ready to claim the house and the cash and skip away clean. He thought he was being clever. What he was actually doing was building, with his own hands, the case for the bank to lock everything down the moment a divorce filing crossed their desk with a fraud flag attached. And the fraud flag. Oh, the fraud flag. I did not place it. I want to be very clear, because I will not stand in front of you and pretend to a power I did not use. I did not call the bank and lie about my husband. What I did was simpler and far more devastating. When Patricia Okafor reviewed the records, she found that Marcus, in setting up his transfers, had signed 2 documents using the authority of the holding company. The holding company that was in my name, that he had no legal right to bind. He had, in plain terms, signed my company's name to move money for his own personal purposes. Because he assumed, as he had assumed for 31 years, that what was mine was his to use. It was not. And the moment the bank's compliance officer understood that an account holder, me, had not authorized transfers being made against her holding company by a man who only thought he had the authority, the bank did what banks do. They froze it. All of it. Pending clarity. To protect themselves. Marcus filed for divorce on a Thursday. The papers were served the following week. And the freeze landed 72 hours after he handed me that folder on my birthday on a Tuesday afternoon while he was at lunch with the man he wanted to make his new business partner, the man he had been bragging to for a month about the clean exit he was about to make, and the woman he was about to leave behind. I know it was a Tuesday at lunch because he called me from the restaurant. I had not heard Marcus Whitfield's voice shake in 31 years. It was shaking. "Eleanor," he said, and there was a roar of restaurant behind him, the clink of expensive glasses, the murmur of the people he had wanted to impress. "Eleanor, the cards aren't working. None of them. The bank says the accounts are frozen. What did you do?" And I sat in the spare bedroom that he called my hobby room, surrounded by 18 years of immaculate books, and I said, in my mother's calm voice, "I didn't do anything, Marcus. I never do anything. You always told me I just keep the books. Maybe you should call the bank and ask them whose name those accounts are in." There was a silence on the line so complete I could hear the ice settling in his glass. "What do you mean, whose name?" he said. I said, "You should have read the documents," and I hung up, and I set the phone down on the desk, and I looked out the window at the maple tree turning gold, and for the first time in 18 months, I let myself cry. But I want to tell you what kind of crying it was, because it was not the crying he expected from me. It was not grief. It was the crying you do when you have carried something heavy for a very long time and you finally get to set it down. One tear, and then another, and my face perfectly still. The way my grandmother's face must have been still the day the adjuster finally signed the check. Now I have taken you to the moment the freeze landed, and I have told you the bones of why. But a reckoning is not bones. A reckoning is the slow, specific, human unfolding of consequence onto a man who built it for himself. And I am going to give you all of it. Because you deserve to see it land, and because Marcus deserved to feel every inch of it, and because I have earned the right to tell it. Let me take you back to the days right after the papers, before the freeze, when Marcus still believed he was winning. The afternoon of my birthday, after he went out, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. I did not call anyone. I did not, I want to confess, immediately feel strong. I felt 64 years old and alone in a house I had loved, with a folder on the table that contained the legal end of the only marriage I had ever had. Strength is a thing you build before you need it, and then on the day you need it, it is already poured, like a foundation, and you walk on it. But it does not feel like strength while you are standing on it. It just feels like the floor. I called Coretta. Coretta Banks has been my closest friend for 22 years, since the summer we planted the hydrangeas, and she is a widow, and she is the only person on this earth who knew about Vanessa and the charges and the 18 months of quiet preparation. Because a woman who carries a thing like that alone will break, and Coretta was the one who carried it with me. She came over within the hour with a casserole and a bottle of the sweet wine we both pretend not to like, and she sat at my kitchen table, and she looked at the folder, and she looked at me, and she said, "Well, he finally did it, the fool. He did it on my birthday, I said. That man, Coretta said, has never once in 31 years remembered your birthday without you reminding him. You think he remembered today? And I had not thought of that. He had handed me divorce papers on my 64th birthday, and he had not even known it was my birthday. Because he had never once, in 3 decades, kept the date himself. And somehow that small thing, that he could end our marriage on the one day of the year that was mine, and not even register the cruelty of it, told me more clearly than the folder ever could that there was nothing left to save. I was not ending something living. I was filing the paperwork on something that had been dead a long time, and I had simply been the only one still keeping it tidy. Tell me you're ready, Coretta said. I'm ready, I said. Tell me your name is on everything. My name is on everything. Then God help that man, Coretta said, and she poured the wine, because he just kicked over a hornet's nest he doesn't even know is full of hornets, and he did it wearing the suit you bought him. We laughed then, the both of us, the kind of laugh that is half a sob, and then the laugh did turn into a sob, mine. Finally, the first real crying I had done since the morning, and Coretta came around the table and held me while I did it, and she did not tell me to stop, and she did not tell me it would be all right, because Coretta is not a woman who lies to make you feel better. She just held on, and let me cry out 31 years, and when I was done she wiped my face with a paper napkin like I was a child, and she said, "There, now we've cried. We don't have to do that again. From here on out, Eleanor Grace, we plan." And we ate the casserole, and we drank the sweet wine we both pretend not to like, and somewhere past midnight, when the wine was low, Coretta lifted her glass and said to Ada Hamilton, who saw this coming 35 years ago, and I lifted mine, and we drank to my grandmother in the kitchen of the house a man had told me to pack up and leave, and that was my 64th birthday. I want the women watching to know that. You can be served divorce papers on your birthday by a man who forgot the day, by a man who could not even be bothered to know it was the day, and you can still, that same night, cry it out and then laugh at your own kitchen table with a friend who loves you, and lift a glass to a grandmother who built you a wall out of paper before you were old enough to need one. The reckoning is coming, and I will give you all of it. But I want you to notice, before we get there, that the reckoning is not the thing that saves you. The friend at the table is the thing that saves you. The reckoning is just the part where the world catches up to what the friend already knew, which is that you were worth loving the whole time. Over the next few days, Marcus carried himself around the house like a man who had already won and was merely waiting for the formalities. He slept in the guest room, which suited me. He took phone calls in the garage with the door closed, which I am sure he thought was discreet, and which told me, every single time, that he was talking to either his attorney or Vanessa, because those were the only 2 people he would hide a conversation from his wife to have. He started, in small ways, to act like a landlord rather than a husband. He mentioned, over coffee, that I should think about timelines for finding a new place. He left a sticky note on the dining room hutch that had belonged to my mother, the only piece of furniture in that house that had come from Delaney Street, and the note said, in his handwriting, "Sell or take." And I stood looking at that note for a long time, at my mother's hutch with a sticky note slapped on it like a yard sale tag, and something in me that had been soft for 31 years finished turning to something else. I did not say a word. I took the sticky note off the hutch, and I put it in the folder with the divorce papers, because I am a woman who keeps records, and a man who labels his wife's mother's furniture for disposal is a man whose words you may want to have in writing later. I want to stay a moment longer with that sticky note, because I have come to think of it as the smallest cruelty, and therefore the truest one. A man can convince himself that taking the house is just business, that draining the accounts is just being practical, that leaving a wife for a younger woman is just being honest about happiness. Those are large betrayals, and large betrayals come dressed in justifications. But there is no justification for a yellow sticky note on a dead woman's hutch. Sell or take. 2 words, in his own hand, slapped onto the one piece of furniture in that house that had crossed the years from Delaney Street. The sideboard my mother had polished every Saturday of my childhood with a rag and a tin of wax, the only thing of hers I had left in the world. He did not even see it as a thing with a history. To Marcus it was an object in a house he was liquidating, and he labeled it the way you label a box in a garage. And in that one careless yellow square I understood the whole architecture of what had gone wrong between us. He had stopped being able to see that anything around him had a story that was not his own. The hutch was just furniture. The wife was just the bookkeeper. The marriage was just an arrangement he had outgrown. A man who can no longer see the histories of the things he lives among is a man who has stopped being able to love. And you cannot stay married to a man like that, no matter how much you once did. So I peeled the note off, gently the way you would peel a bandage, and I held it in my hand, and I did not throw it away. I put it in the folder with the divorce papers, because I am a woman who keeps records, and because some part of me knew, even then, that I might one day want to remember exactly how small a man can be when he believes no one who matters is watching. I have it still. It is the only thing of Marcus's I kept. He had a lawyer, of course, a sharp young man named Brent Dolan, the kind of divorce attorney who advertises on bus benches and wins by exhausting the other side. Brent Dolan sent me a letter, 3 days after the papers, that was a masterpiece of intimidation. It laid out, in confident paragraphs, all the things Marcus was entitled to. The house, the bulk of the savings, the business that Marcus had built, it said, through his own labor and acumen. It offered me, in its generosity, a modest monthly support for a period of years and the suggestion that I retain my own counsel, though it implied, gently, that I would be wise not to waste money fighting a losing position. I read Brent Dolan's letter twice. Then I drove it across town to Patricia Okafor's office, and I laid it on her desk, and Patricia, who was 44 and brilliant and was trained by Mr. Abernathy himself, read it once, set it down, and smiled the smallest smile I have ever seen on a human face. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, "does Mr. Dolan know whose name the holding company is in?" "I don't believe Mr. Dolan knows anything," I said, "except what Marcus told him. And Marcus has never read a document I prepared in his life." "Then this," Patricia said, tapping the bus bench lawyer's confident letter, "is the most expensive piece of fiction I've read all year. Mrs. Whitfield, may I ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Did you do anything improper? Did you hide assets, move money, conceal accounts?" "No," I said. "Everything I have was always mine, in the open, for decades. I did not hide a dollar. I never had to." "That," said Patricia Okafor, "is the most beautiful sentence a client has ever said to me. Because it means I don't have to defend you. I just have to introduce Mr. Dolan to the public record." And she leaned back in her chair, and she looked at me with something like joy, and she said, "Mrs. Whitfield, your husband filed for divorce to take a house he does not own, using money that was never his, secured against a trust he cannot touch. He has, with respect, walked off a cliff and has not yet looked down. The only decision you have to make is how gently you'd like me to let him land." And I thought about the sticky note on my mother's hutch. Sell or take. "Patricia," I said, "let him land like he means it. I want to pause here, because I have told you a great deal about money and documents and names on accounts, and I do not want you to think this story is only about money. It is not. The money is the instrument. The wound is older than the money. And I would be lying to you if I let you believe that what I wanted in those weeks was simply to win. What I wanted was to be seen. For 31 years, I had been the smartest person in the room and the least acknowledged one. I had been the and in Whitfield and Associates, the silent partner, the hobby room bookkeeper, the comfortable chair. And I think, if I am honest, that some part of every dismissed woman's reckoning is not about the house or the money at all. It is about the moment the people who look through you finally see you. Not the moment they suffer, the moment they understand. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole of my grandmother's teaching. She did not want me to make the adjuster suffer. She wanted him to sign the check. She wanted to be seen as a woman who could not be cheated. Suffering is what small people want. Being seen is what dignified ones want. And I am, whatever else I am, Ada Hamilton's granddaughter, and I wanted to be seen. The freeze, when it came on that Tuesday, was the first time in 31 years that Marcus Whitfield truly saw me. I heard it in the shake of his voice from the restaurant. "You should have read the documents," I told him, and the silence that followed was the silence of a man seeing his wife clearly for the first time in 3 decades, and being terrified of what he saw. He came home that night, a different man. The briskness was gone. He came in through the garage, and I heard him stop in the kitchen, and I came down the stairs, calmly, in no hurry, and I found him standing at the counter with both hands flat on the granite, staring at nothing, his tie loosened, his face gray. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. "I'll make coffee. We should talk, and I want to keep this civilized." I gave him his own words back. He looked at me as if I had struck him. We sat at the table where he had handed me the papers, and I made the coffee, and I poured 2 cups this time, one for each of us, because I am not a cruel woman. And I set his down in front of him, and I watched him hold the cup in both hands the way a cold man holds anything warm. "Explain it to me," he said. "The bank. The accounts. Eleanor, I have never seen you like this. Explain it to me." So I did. I explained it slowly and completely, the way I would explain a reconciled ledger to a client, with no anger and no triumph in my voice, because the facts did not need my anger to do their work. I told him about the holding company that owned the building and whose name was on its formation documents. I told him about the investment line. I told him about the trust, and Ada Hamilton, and Mr. Abernathy, and the $11,000 in 1993 that had built everything, structured as a loan, documented, mine. I told him about the refinance 11 years ago, the one he signed on his way to golf, that secured our house against my trust. And I told him, gently, that when he had signed the holding company's name to move money for his own purposes in the last 3 months, he had bound a company he did not own, and that the bank, upon understanding this, had frozen everything to protect itself, and that none of it, not $1 of it, was anything I had done. "You did this," he said, "but there was no force in it. You set me up." "No," I said. "I kept the books. I have always kept the books. You handed me your business plan in 1993 and you said, 'Build something,' and I built it. And I put my name where my grandmother taught me to put it, and you never once asked to see. For 31 years, Marcus, I told you exactly what I was doing, and you didn't listen, because listening to me wasn't worth your time. The only thing I did differently this year was stop reminding you to check." He put his face in his hands. "And here is where I have to tell you the truth about myself again, because I want this to be honest. I did not feel triumphant watching my husband break at our kitchen table. I felt tired. And I felt sad. And underneath the tired and the sad, I felt a hard, clean thing like the floor of that poured foundation. A thing that said, "You are seen now, Eleanor, finally. On the day your marriage ends, you are seen." And I would be lying if I told you the hard, clean thing did not feel, in some buried place, like joy. "What happens now?" he said into his hands. "Now," I said, "we let the lawyers do their work. My attorney is named Patricia Okafor. She is very good. Your attorney is named Brent Dolan, and he advertises on bus benches, and he is going to have a very difficult month." Marcus looked up. "What do you want, Eleanor? Just tell me what you want. The house? Take the house. The money? I can't even. Just tell me what you want." And this is the part I want every woman watching to hear. Because this is the part where a smaller woman would have made her mistake. A smaller woman would have leaned across the table and made him beg. A smaller woman would have taken everything and salted the earth. I felt the pull of it. Sweet Lord, I felt it. 31 years of being looked through, and there he was, offering me the whole world to make the consequence stop, and the pull to grind him down was the strongest thing I have ever resisted. But my grandmother did not grind the adjuster down. She made him sign the check, and then she let him go. Because a woman with her name on the deed does not need to humiliate anyone. The deed does the talking. "I don't want the house, Marcus," I said. "I never wanted the house. The house was always mine. You just didn't know it. What I want is for you to understand, finally, completely, what you had and what you threw away on a woman named Vanessa and a clean exit you thought you could make. I want you to sit in that understanding. And then I want you to sign Patricia's papers, which will be fair, more than fair, fairer than you deserve. And I want you to leave my house. And I want us both to be free. That's what I want. I don't want to ruin you. I just want you to know who I was the whole time you weren't looking." He was quiet for a long while. The coffee went cold between us. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, the maple I had loved for 26 years let go of a few of its gold leaves into the early dark, and I sat with my husband in the ruins of the life we had built, and I felt no triumph, only a great and weary tenderness for the both of us, for the young man who had crossed a fellowship hall to tell me I was the smartest person in the room, and the young woman who had believed him, and all the years between then and now that had carried us so far from each other while we sat in the same house. "Do you remember," I said, "the night we met? You came across that whole hall to bring me a glass of punch, and you said I'd been watching everybody all night and saying nothing, and you bet I was the smartest person in the room. Do you remember that?" He nodded slowly. He could not speak. "You were right," I said. "I was. I have been the smartest person in almost every room I've ever stood in, Marcus, including the rooms full of men who looked through me to find you. And the saddest thing, the thing I'll grieve when I'm done being angry, is that you knew it the first night, and then you spent 30 years making yourself forget it. Because remembering it made you feel small. You didn't have to feel small. There was room in this for both of us to be large. I never once needed you to be less, so that I could be more. But you needed me to be furniture, so that the story you told about yourself could be true. And I let you, because I loved you, and because loving you was easier than being seen by you. So this is on me too. I let myself disappear for 31 years. I'm done doing that now." And then Marcus Whitfield, 66 years old, the most confident man in every room he had ever entered, the boy who could not afford his own suit, looked across the table at the wife he had handed divorce papers on her birthday, and he said the only honest thing he had said in years. "I never knew you at all," he said. 31 years, and I never once knew you." "No," I agreed. "You didn't, but it's not too late to know it now. I told you I would tell you about Vanessa, and I will, because she is part of the unfolding. But I want to tell you about her the way she actually mattered, which is not very much, and that is its own kind of justice." Marcus had imagined, I think, that Vanessa was his prize, the younger woman, 46 to his 66, who made him feel like the self-made man he told everyone he was. He had imagined a new life with her in the house on Briarcliff Lane, my hydrangeas, my maple, my kitchen, with a younger wife, who did not know enough about money to keep the books, and therefore would never look through him the way he imagined I had. He wanted, I came to understand, a woman who would believe his version of his life because I no longer could. Vanessa lasted exactly 11 days after the freeze. I know this because Coretta knew the woman who did Vanessa's nails. And small towns are small towns even when they pretend to be cities. The day the accounts froze, Marcus was a wealthy man about to make a clean exit. 11 days later, he was a man whose business operating accounts were locked, whose personal cards were declined, whose house was secured against a trust he could not touch, and who was sleeping in his own guest room while his wife's attorney prepared papers. Vanessa, it turned out, was not interested in that version of Marcus. The hotel 2 hours away and the jewelry that never came to me had bought him a companion for the wealthy self-made man, not for the gray-faced one staring at frozen accounts. She stopped returning his calls. I am told she is now seeing a cardiologist in the next county. I felt, when I heard, a thing I am not proud of and will not pretend I did not feel, which was a small, mean, entirely human satisfaction, and then I let it go, because carrying it was beneath the woman my grandmother raised. Vanessa was never my enemy. Vanessa was a symptom. The disease was a man who believed his wife was furniture, and the cure was the public record. Now let me tell you about the part that mattered most to Marcus, more than the money, more even than Vanessa, because it is the part that reveals what he truly worshipped. Marcus worshipped being a self-made man in front of other men, the country club, the partner dinners, the bragging. And the cruelest, truest consequence of the freeze was not that his cards declined. It was that they declined in front of the people he most wanted to impress. I told you the freeze landed while he was at lunch with the man he wanted to make his new partner. Let me tell you who that man was. His name was Gerald Prince, and Gerald Prince was old money in our city. The kind of man Marcus had spent 30 years trying to be invited to dinner with, and that Tuesday lunch was the lunch Marcus had been angling toward for a year. He had told Gerald Prince a story over the preceding months, a story about a successful man simplifying his life, shedding an old marriage, ready to put real capital into a new venture. And in the middle of that lunch, at the restaurant where the city's important men ate, when the check came and Marcus reached for the card he had always reached for with such easy confidence, the card declined. And he tried another, and it declined. And he tried a third. The business card, the one that drew on the operating account, and it declined. Because 3 hours earlier the bank had frozen everything, and Marcus Whitfield sat across from Gerald Prince, the man he had spent a year trying to impress, and could not pay for lunch. I learned the details of that lunch slowly, over the following months, in pieces, the way you learn anything in a city that is really a small town wearing a city's clothes. Marcus had been courting Gerald Prince for the better part of a year. He had told me about it, in the way he told me things, which was as a performance of his own importance rather than a sharing between partners, dropping the name at dinner, mentioning the golf, the cigars, the way Gerald had said Marcus was the kind of man he liked to do business with. Gerald Prince was the gate Marcus had spent 30 years trying to walk through, the door into the rooms where old money sat, and that Tuesday lunch was the day Marcus believed the door would finally open. He had dressed for it. Coretta's friend who waited tables there told her later that Marcus had been there early, had asked for the good table, had ordered the expensive bottle before Gerald even arrived, performing the wealthy ease of a man who belonged. And then the check came, and Marcus reached for the card he had reached for 10,000 times, the platinum one, the one that had never once failed him, and he handed it to the waiter with the easy confidence of a self-made man, and the waiter came back quietly and bent to his ear and said the card had been declined. And Marcus laughed it off, the way men do, and handed over a second card, and that one declined too. And a third, the business card, the one drawn on the operating account, and that one declined as well, because 3 hours earlier, in a glass office downtown, a compliance officer had frozen everything. And Marcus Whitfield sat across the good table from Gerald Prince, the man he had spent a year and 30 years becoming worthy of, in the restaurant where the city's important men ate their lunches and could not pay for the bottle he had ordered to impress him. I did not arrange that. I want to be clear, again, because the truth is stronger than any scheme. I did not know about the lunch with Gerald Prince that day. I did not time the freeze. The bank's compliance department timed the freeze, on their own schedule, for their own protection, on the very Tuesday Marcus had chosen to perform his self-made success for the most important audience of his life. Some people will tell you that is coincidence. My grandmother would have told you it is what happens when a man builds his whole life on a lie, and the lie picks its own moment to come due. I believe my grandmother. There is a justice that works on its own clock, slower than we want, and more precise than we could ever arrange. And all you have to do to be on the right side of it is to have kept your hands clean and your name where it belongs, and to wait. I had kept my hands clean. I had kept my name where it belonged, and the clock struck on a Tuesday, at lunch, in front of Gerald Prince, with no help from me at all. Gerald Prince paid for the lunch. I am told he was gracious about it, in the way that wealthy men are gracious when they have just learned everything they need to know about a man they will now never call again. And Marcus came home gray-faced and called me from the car, and his voice was shaking. And I think, looking back, that the declined card in front of Gerald Prince hurt him more than the divorce ever could have, because the divorce only cost him a wife he had stopped seeing, and the declined card cost him the only thing he truly loved, which was the story he told about himself. The weeks that followed were paperwork, mostly, and I am not going to pretend paperwork is dramatic, except that this paperwork was the most satisfying I have ever done, and I have done a great deal of paperwork. Patricia Okafor and Brent Dolan exchanged letters. Brent Dolan's letters grew, over the weeks, noticeably less confident. The bus bench bravado of the first one gave way, by the third, to a careful, lawyerly request to understand the full picture of the marital estate, which is the sound a lawyer makes when he has finally read the documents his client should have read 31 years ago and realized his client has no case. There was a meeting, eventually, the four of us, in a conference room downtown, on the 18th floor of a glass building with a long mahogany table and a view of the city laid out small and gray below. I dressed carefully that morning. I want to tell you what I wore, because clothes are a language, and I was about to say something in it. A deep navy blue tailored blazer over an emerald green silk blouse, my grandmother's pearls at my ears, the fine gold chain my mother left me, and my wedding band, which I still wore. Because the marriage was not yet legally ended, and because I am a woman who finishes things properly, I carried a burgundy leather folder with brass corners, the one I had carried to every important meeting of my life, and inside it was the public record, the whole of it, in order, indexed. I did not need the folder. Patricia had everything. But I carried it the way a soldier carries a flag, because it was the instrument of everything, and I wanted it in the room. Marcus arrived with Brent Dolan, and the two of them sat on one side of the long table, and Patricia and I sat on the other, and there was coffee in a silver carafe that no one touched. Marcus would not look at me at first. He looked at his hands, at the table, at the gray city below. He had aged. In the weeks since the freeze, the confidence that had been the whole architecture of his face had gone out of it, and what was left was just a tired man of 66 who was beginning to understand the size of his mistake. Brent Dolan opened with bluster, because bluster was all he had left, and he had been paid to use it. He spoke for several minutes about marital property and equitable distribution and the contributions of both spouses to the marriage, and Patricia let him talk, the way I had let Marcus talk at the kitchen table, because there is a particular power in letting a man finish a speech you already know is built on sand. And when Brent Dolan was done, Patricia Okafor opened her own folder, and she began, in her calm, clear voice, to lay out the public record, document by document. She started with the house. She laid the refinance documents on the table and slid them across, and she showed Brent Dolan, line by line, the security agreement that pledged the property against the assets of the Hamilton Family Trust, and she showed him the signature. Marcus's own signature on the page where he had agreed to it 11 years before, on his way to a golf game. I watched Brent Dolan read it. I watched his eyes move down the page and stop at the signature and go very still. Then, the holding company. Patricia laid out the formation documents and the ownership records and the long, unbroken chain of filings going back decades, every one of them naming a single owner, Eleanor Grace Whitfield, and not once, in any document, in any year, the name Marcus Whitfield. Then the investment line, the same. Then the original loan from 1993, the promissory note from the trust to me, the documented capital that built the entire business, the paper my grandmother's lawyer had taught me to keep, still crisp after 31 years, because I had kept it crisp. And then, last, the thing that closed the trap. Patricia laid out the 2 documents Marcus had signed in the last 3 months, the ones where he had bound the holding company, my holding company, to move money for his own purposes, signing as if he had the authority, because he had assumed for 31 years that what was mine was his to use. She did not editorialize. She simply laid them beside the ownership records and let the 2 sets of documents sit on the table next to each other, and she said, "Mr. Dolan, your client signed these instruments binding a company he does not own and never has. The bank, upon understanding this, froze the accounts to protect itself. My client did not request the freeze. My client did not need to. My client simply owns what she owns, and your client signed what he had no right to sign, and the bank did the rest." The room was very quiet. I watched Brent Dolan's face as he understood, fully and finally, that the house was secured against my trust, that the holding company was mine, that the investment line was mine, that the business itself had been built on a documented loan from my grandmother's money, and that his client had, in his rush to leave, signed instruments he had no authority to sign. I watched the bus bench lawyer realize he had taken a case he could not win against a woman everyone had underestimated, including, until very recently, the woman herself. He set down the documents very carefully, as if they were hot, and he turned to Marcus, and he said, in a low voice that I was not supposed to hear but did, "You told me the house was yours. You told me all of this was yours." And Marcus did not answer him. because there was no answer, and I watched my husband understand, in that low exchange between him and the lawyer he was paying, that he had been wrong about the central fact of his own life for 31 years. "My client," Brent Dolan said, when Patricia finished, and he had to clear his throat and start again, "My client is prepared to discuss a reasonable settlement." "My client," said Patricia Okafor, "is prepared to be generous, which is more than the law requires of her. Mrs. Whitfield has no intention of leaving Mr. Whitfield destitute, despite the fact that she would be entirely within her rights to do so." And she slid a single sheet of paper across the table, and on it was the offer I had instructed her to make, and I want to tell you what was on it, because it is the truest measure of who I decided to be. I gave Marcus the operating accounts of the business, the joint ones, the ones that were genuinely ours. I gave him his car and his clothes and his half of the things we had bought together over 31 years. I gave him a fair monthly sum for 3 years to land on his feet, drawn from the profits of a business I now wholly controlled, because I am not a woman who lets even a foolish man starve. And I kept what was always mine: the house, the holding company, the investment line, the trust, my grandmother's money, my name, the foundation I had poured over a lifetime. It was, by any measure, a fraction of what I was entitled to keep for myself, and a fraction of what a vengeful woman would have squeezed from him. Patricia told me, privately, that I was being too generous, that I was leaving money on the table that was mine by right, and I told her what my grandmother would have told her. "Patricia," I said, "I am not in this to take everything from a broken man. I am in this to keep what was always mine, and to be seen, finally, as the woman who built it. A woman who has to take everything to feel like she won, never really had anything to begin with. I have everything. I always did. I can afford to be generous, and being able to afford generosity is the whole point of having one." Marcus signed the papers in that conference room. I watched his hand as he signed, the same hand that had slid the folder across the table on my birthday, and it did not shake. He signed slowly and carefully, and when he was done, he set the pen down and he looked at me across the long table. And for a moment, the years fell away, and I saw the confident boy from the church social who had crossed the whole fellowship hall to tell me I was the smartest person in the room. "You were always the smart one," he said, quietly, just to me, under the lawyer's shuffling of papers. I knew it the first night. I just spent 30 years pretending I'd forgotten, because remembering it made me smaller. "I'm sorry, Eleanor, for the birthday, for the note on your mother's hutch, for all of it. I'm sorry, and I want to tell you what I said back, because it is the heart of the whole thing. I forgive you, Marcus," I said. And I meant it. Not because you've earned it. You haven't. But because I am not going to carry you out of this marriage in my chest for the rest of my life. I forgave you for me, not for you. You go on now, and you build something of your own, with your own name on it this time. And you remember whose name was on everything the whole time you thought you were the only Whitfield that mattered." He nodded. He could not speak. And he gathered his things, and he left the conference room, and that was the last time Marcus Whitfield and I were ever in a room together as husband and wife. I sat at that long table after he was gone, and Patricia Okafor sat with me, and neither of us said anything for a while. Then Patricia said, "Mr. Abernathy is going to be sorry he missed this. He always said your grandmother was the toughest client he ever had. He's going to say you were tougher." "My grandmother," I said, "would have taken the house and the business and the man's pension and his good name too, and she would have done it without raising her voice, and she would have been right to. I'm softer than she was. No, Patricia said. You're not softer. You're freer. She had to take everything because in her time, taking everything was the only way to be safe. You got to choose to be generous because you were never in danger. That's not soft, Mrs. Whitfield. That's what winning is supposed to look like. That's the thing she was building toward the whole time. A granddaughter who could afford to forgive. I have thought about that sentence many times since. A granddaughter who could afford to forgive. Ada Hamilton waited 11 months and made the adjuster pay every dollar. And she rebuilt the store, and she put me on her knee and ran my small finger under her name on the deed. And she did all of it so that one day a woman of her blood could sit at a long mahogany table and choose mercy from a position of total strength. That is the inheritance, not the money. The freedom to forgive without being a fool about it. Let me bring you through the after, because a reckoning is not finished at the signature. The signature is the turn. The after is the proof. Marcus moved out 3 days after he signed. I was not there when he left. I went to Coretta's that afternoon on purpose, because there are some things a woman should not have to watch, and a man carrying boxes out of a marriage is one of them. When I came home in the evening, the guest room was bare and his closet was empty, and there was a single thing left on the kitchen counter. His house key, set down on the granite where he had once stood gray-faced, asking me what I had done. He did not leave a note. I was glad he did not. We had said everything. He took the operating accounts and his car and his half of the things we had bought together, and he rented an apartment across town, and he started, at 66 years old, to build something with his own name on it for the first time in his life, which is a thing I think every man should have to do once, and most never do. I am told it is going slowly. The clean exit he had imagined, the new partnership with Gerald Prince, the younger wife in my kitchen with my hydrangeas out the window, none of it came to pass. Gerald Prince never called again. Vanessa was long gone. He has a small agency now, just him and a part-time girl who answers the phone in a strip mall office with his own name on the glass. And he keeps his own books now, badly I would imagine, and from what Coretta hears through the long quiet wires of this small city, he is humbled in a way that is good for him. The way a field is good after it has been turned. I do not wish him ill. I want you to hear me say that, and to believe it, because the temptation of a story like mine is to want the villain destroyed, and I will not give you that, because it would be a lie, and because it is not who my grandmother raised me to be. I do not wish Marcus ill. I wish him a smaller, truer life than the inflated one he was living. I wish him the experience, at last, of carrying his own weight and signing his own name and finding out what he is actually worth without a wife in a spare bedroom quietly making him into more than he was. I think in time he may find it. I think it may make him a better man than 30 years of prosperity ever did. And if it does, then even his ruin will have been a mercy, though neither of us would have called it that on the day the cards declined. I stayed in the house on Briarcliff Lane. My house. I want you to understand the quiet enormity of that. For 31 years I had lived in a house I was told was my husband's, by his grace on his sufferance. The morning of the papers, he told me to pack. In the autumn after the signature, I sat on my own back porch in my own house and watched my own maple turn gold. And I planted new bulbs along the walk for the spring, and I took my mother's hutch, the one with the sticky note that said sell or take, and I had it refinished by a craftsman downtown, and it stands now in my dining room, gleaming, the only thing in that house that came from Delaney Street. And every time I pass it, I remember that a man tried to put a price tag on my mother's furniture, and that I outlasted him. I took over Whitfield and Associates completely. And the first thing I did, the very first thing, before I changed a single policy or hired a single person, was change the name. I had the letters taken down from the front of the building myself on a Saturday, and I stood on the sidewalk in my coat and watched a young man on a ladder unscrew the brushed steel letters that spelled out a man's name over a business a woman built. And when the wall was bare, I felt something I had not felt in 31 years, which was the feeling of a clean page. And then I had the new name put up. Hamilton Grace Financial. My grandmother's name, Hamilton, and my mother's lesson, Grace, which is the thing you hold on to when the world gives you nothing else, both of them in gold letters, where everyone can see them, where I can see them every single morning when I park my car and walk to the door of a company that finally, after a lifetime, carries the names of the two women who made me. I run it from a real office now, not a spare bedroom, with a staff of 9, in 3 rooms with good light and a conference table of my own, and a wall where I hung 2 photographs. My grandmother in front of her corner store in 1951, and my mother on the steps of the narrow house on Delaney Street. So that every client who comes to trust me with their money sits in a room watched over by the women who taught me how to keep it. We have grown, in the 2 years since, by a measure I will not boast about, except to say that it turns out the woman who actually kept the books for 31 years knew how to run the company rather well. Better, if I am honest, than it was ever run before, because I run it the way my grandmother ran the corner store, by being the one nobody can fool. The men who looked through me at those dinner parties send their business to me now. I find a strange grace in that. They come into my office in their good suits, the same men who used to hand me their empty wine glasses without looking at my face, and they sit across the table from me and ask me to manage their money. Because they have heard that Hamilton Grace Financial is the firm that does not make mistakes. And some of them, I promise you, this is true. Some of them do not even realize that I am the same Eleanor who used to refill their wine at the Whitfield dinners. They look at the woman behind the desk with the navy blazer and the pearls and the company named after her, and they cannot connect her to the quiet wife in the background of a memory they barely kept. I do not correct them. My grandmother taught me that the people who underestimate you are handing you a gift, and a wise woman takes it quietly and says thank you. So I take it. I say thank you. I manage their money beautifully, because I would never punish a client for the sins of his manners, and at the end of the quarter I send them an excellent invoice. And I think of my grandmother changing the salesman's 4s back to 4s in front of his face, being the one he could not fool, and I smile to myself, and I sign my name. Eleanor Grace Whitfield. I kept the name. I earned it. It was never his to begin with. I want to tell you about one more thing, because it is the thing that lets me know the reckoning was complete, and it has nothing to do with money. About a year after the divorce, Coretta and I were at the grocery store, an ordinary Tuesday, and we ran into a woman from the old country club crowd, one of the wives who had sat at those dinners and smiled at Marcus's stories and never once spoken to me as if I were a whole person. She saw me, and she did a small double take, the way you do when you cannot quite place someone, and then she said, "Eleanor? Eleanor Whitfield? My goodness, I almost didn't recognize you. You look wonderful. Different. What have you been up to?" And Coretta, God bless her, opened her mouth to say something proud and cutting, because Coretta has carried my whole story in her chest beside her own, and she has earned the right to be cutting on my behalf. And I touched her arm, just lightly, and she closed her mouth. Because 22 years of friendship means you can stop each other with a touch. And I said to the woman, simply, I've been building something, with my own name on it, and I smiled at her, a real smile, with no edge in it, and I asked after her grandchildren, and I let her go, and Coretta and I pushed our cart on down the aisle, and that was enough. That was more than enough. I did not need her to know the whole story. I did not need her to know about the freeze, or the declined card, or the conference room, or the gold letters on the door of a building downtown. I did not need her to feel ashamed of the 20 years she had handed me her empty wine glass without learning my face. I did not need her to suffer at all. I needed only one thing, and I had it. And I had had it for a while by then, without quite realizing I could stop wanting anything more. I needed to know, in myself, that the woman she had looked through for 20 years was now a woman she almost did not recognize, not because I had grown rich, but because I stood up straight. That was the whole of it. The not recognizing me was not about the clothes or the company. It was that I no longer made myself small enough to disappear in a crowd of people who had decided not to see me. I had stopped doing the disappearing. And once you stop disappearing, the people who only knew the disappeared version of you genuinely cannot find you anymore. And that, it turns out, is the sweetest revenge there is, and it is not revenge at all. It is just becoming visible, which is a thing you do for yourself, and not against anyone. That was being seen, at last, by the only person whose seeing had ever truly mattered, which I had finally learned at 65 years old, was me. Because here is the thing I learned, and the thing I most want to leave with you. After all of it, after the papers and the freeze and the frozen accounts and the declined card in front of Gerald Prince and the long mahogany table and the signature and the gold letters on the door, the reckoning was never really about Marcus. Marcus was the occasion. The reckoning was about a woman who had spent 64 years putting her name where her grandmother taught her to put it, and being looked through anyway, and who finally, on the morning a man handed her divorce papers on her birthday, decided to look at herself. I was always the smartest person in the room. He told me so the first night, and then spent 30 years forgetting it. And I let him, because letting him cost me nothing, and because some quiet part of me was still the girl from Delaney Street who was afraid that if she stood up straight, someone would take everything away. My grandmother spent her whole life teaching me that no one could take what had my name on it. It took me until 64 to believe her. But I believed her in the end. I believe her now. I want to come back, before I close, to the morning at the kitchen table, because I have carried that morning a long way and I want to set it down properly. A man in a gray suit, freshly shaved, smelling of the cologne I bought him, sliding a folder across the table and telling me to pack. He thought he was ending my story. He was beginning it. The folder he slid across the table was not my eviction. It was my emancipation, and he handed it to me himself, with both hands, smiling, on the morning of my 64th birthday, having no idea at all, that he was setting free the only Whitfield that ever mattered. There is a thing my grandmother used to say when she ran my small finger under her name on the deed. She would say, "Eleanor Grace, your value is not in what they call you, it is in what you sign." And I did not understand it for 55 years. I understand it now. My value was never in being his associate, his secretary, his comfortable chair, his hobby room bookkeeper, the silent, and in Whitfield and Associates. My value was in my name, which I had been quietly signing on to things my whole life, exactly where Ada Hamilton taught me to sign it. In a marriage to a man who never once thought to read. So that is my story. That is how my husband filed for divorce to take the house, and how the bank froze the accounts in my name, and how a woman the world counted out discovered she had been holding the power all along. I did not win it that morning. I had won it decades before, with every quiet signature and every careful document, the day I decided to believe my grandmother. The morning of the papers was only the day I finally got to find out. If this story touched your heart tonight, I want to leave you with a question, and I would truly love to hear your answer. Have you ever been looked through by someone who should have seen you? A husband, a child, an in-law, a sibling, and quietly held a strength they never knew about? Or have you been on the other side and learned, too late, the worth of someone you took for granted? There is no wrong answer. This is the kind of thing we talk about here, gently, like family. And if a story about a dismissed woman proving she held the power all along, told all the way to the end with no cruelty and no cliffhanger, is the kind of story you came looking for, then do take a moment to like this video and subscribe, and tell me, the way we always do here, where in the world you are watching from, and what time it is in your part of your evening. I read them. Every one. This is a guest book, and I am always glad to see who has come to sit a while. Take care of yourselves. Put your name where it belongs. And remember, the way my grandmother taught me, and the way I am now telling you, your value is not determined by the people who fail to see it. It never was. It never will be. Good night.